Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with the Corporate Whisperer Sally Ivester. As the mastermind behind your first corporate job, she's here to spill the tea on how to crush your first job. With her under-the-hood approach and straight talking style, she will equip you with the tools to bypass the corporate BS so you can reach your career goals faster. As a first-gen professional who is the child of Chinese immigrants, she has worked hard to get into an Ivy League college and landed her first corporate job. It's quite a story. Enjoy.
Awesome. But I'm looking forward to getting into your life as the Corporate Whisperer, and I want to begin our journey before we get to that point by asking, 4 years ago we were knee-deep into this pandemic, trying to figure it out. How did you ultimately get through that time period, and how did it change the way that you live your life now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. I think the pandemic is a really interesting one, and I think the one that adds even a different complexity to it is that I just had my first kid, too. So I had my first kid in February of 2020, and right after that, at least in California, we had the lockdown and everything was a no-go. And as I thought about my own career and everything that was going on, the pandemic was a great time for us to think about just how do we show up, especially virtually, and how do we think through what it is that we want when we do show up. So much of our time was taken up with work, especially if you're someone who was getting back into it after a maternity leave. And I think when you start to think about what are your priorities and then how do you execute those priorities and then how do you communicate those priorities, I think that really just helps you rethink, how do I want to be in the corporate world? How do I want to show up in my personal life? And how do I make sure I merge the two? So to answer it a little bit more tactically, there are a few things that changed for me coming out of the pandemic. The first one was I made sure I knew what my boundaries were. I think a lot of people were working a lot. There were no such things as going into the office and coming back from the office. And you started to have to think about, when do I want to work? What are my boundaries, especially because you have kids at home? I think the second thing is people start to be a little bit more empathetic. Everyone is facing the exact same thing. And I think that gave us sort of the safe space to talk about what we were facing at home, what we were dealing with, and why having boundaries was so important. And I think the third thing is, how do you communicate that stuff? In person was no longer a thing. You couldn't just show up and talk about things, no such thing as go and get a coffee with people. And so you had to really rely on, how do I talk about things in a really, I would say, succinct way, but also in a way, I call it speak in headlines, that just gets the point across immediately. And I thought that was a great muscle for all of us to build. So I would say, Joe, those are some of the different things that sort of came out of the pandemic for me. What about for you?
So at the end of the day, if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day and they wanted to get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis, one of the kids asks you, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to sort of give everyone a little bit of context, I work in a corporate environment. I work in big tech, and I also have been doing this for over 12 years. My role right now is a chief of staff, and I just want to give everyone that context before we put on that third grade hat. I would say I'm helping make other people's work more successful. I'm helping the team be more successful. So if you think about a soccer team, it's all about how do you help others on the team do better, make the shot, get more passes, anything like that. And then I'm also helping, I would say, the lead player of the team make sure that they can be a better leader. How can we help them communicate more? How can we help them get more of the passes, get more of those wins? So I would say those are the different things that I do, at least how I would explain it to a third grader.
So when you were in the third, it kind of cuts to the quick. When you were in the third grade, what did you want to do when you grew up?
That's a great question. Joe, I'm going to push back on that question a tiny bit because, I hate the notion of what do you want to do when you grow up? Because I feel like all of us are still growing up in some way, shape, or form. And I think this is a thing now that I have kids. I constantly talk about, what do you want to do? Not what do you want to do when you grow up, what do you want to do today? Because especially with technology, I feel like so many third graders actually are making hundreds of thousands of dollars just doing TikTok or Instagram or anything like that. When I wanted to grow up, when I was younger, I wanted to be someone who worked at a grocery store doing self-checkout because I loved just the operations of getting a piece of fruit or a box or a cereal or whatever and then just checking it out. And I love the scanning piece. I also love the piece of just getting to know people. In that particular role, you get to talk to people, you get to meet people, and I really love that dynamic. Now, many years later, too many if I were to count, I don't have that type of role, but I am someone who is more on the front lines. I talk to a lot of people. I collaborate with a lot of people across different teams, and a lot of it is systematic, right? I think the best way for us to get our work done is if we have a system, whether that's every day I block out 2 hours of just deep work time, or every day I get to work at this time because I have to drop off my kids at a certain time, or whatever that would be. But I would say like those are the different thematics that have carried me throughout my life, and I'm leaning more into it. And as I think about what I would want to do maybe 10 years from now or anything like that, is to constantly be learning. I am constantly growing. I'm changing, my role changes, all of that stuff. And I want to continue learning how I can strengthen my superpowers. What are the things I'm naturally good at, and how do I use it to my advantage to just make an impact in the work, but also like in life? What about you?
So,
what do you do? Sorry, did I cut you off?
Oh, no, you're good. What did I want to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to actually be the guy riding with Poncho on the California Pacific Highway in chips.
Yeah.
And then I ended up seeing, cops when I was a teenager, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to go down that route, but I always wanted realistically to get into broadcasting. I've always been a baseball and a sports fan, so in some capacity, that was always something I wanted to get into.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, look at you now.
Yeah, right. See, things happen. You got to just, you got to follow the dreams. So, but I'm curious, you're a natural at this. You've done really well. I'm curious, take me back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds were planted in you. What were some foundational elements that ultimately led to you growing into this role and evolving into who you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. And I would actually say I don't feel natural in the corporate world, to be totally honest. And it's been a thing that I had to work on for many years. And that's really what I talk about a lot, just like in the content I push out, as well as like in the course that I have. I was born in China, but I came to America when I was 1. And so I just basically I grew up in Iowa, and then I grew up outside of Houston, Texas. And education was always a really big thing. And so I went to college on the East Coast. I went to an Ivy League, and then I decided to go into tech. And at that time, and this is aging me a little bit, there was not a lot of tech out there. I knew I wanted to do marketing, but I knew I didn't want to market a toilet paper. I didn't want to work for a Clorox or anything like that, which, to be totally honest, now in my role, I can see the benefits of doing something like that, because there's just so much, there's a muscle that you build when you work in something that's a physical product, and I feel like that muscle is something that we need in tech. But when I grew up, and as I went through this journey, I did not know what it takes to succeed in a corporate role. And the reason I call it the Ivy League piece is because I went to a good school, and even my good school didn't teach me what you need to do in order to be successful in a job. And it's not about being smart. For me, it really came down to, how do I talk about my work? How do I take feedback? How do I tie the projects that I have to these company objectives? And then how do I manage my manager? And I didn't know that stuff. I thought you go in, you just do a good job, you're handed projects, and then you just get better projects and you get promoted. And I thought I was going to be on the path to CEO by the age 25. And life doesn't turn out that way. And I remember just being caught off guard when I didn't know the playbook. I was stumbling, and I was doing a lot of things trial by error because I just had no idea what it took to actually play this game. And by learning from others who are more successful than me, others who I saw as my coworkers but were doing things right, maybe people who I was jealous of at first, but then I started to see them as worthy rivals who were pushing me to be better. That was the unlock for me. And I noticed that there were certain things that they did that I wasn't. And that gap is really what I want to share with others, right? And that gap comes down to are you working loudly? Do you talk about your work, or do you want others to talk about your work? Or are you someone who takes feedback well? Even if you grow up and you play sports, you don't want to work with someone who thinks they're the best, right? Doesn't think that they can't do anything better. And that type of mentality really also applies to the corporate world. Ultimately, you want to be manageable. And if you're not manageable, people don't want to invest in you. Manageable means you're someone who can take feedback well. You're someone who they can give projects and they can roll with the punches. You're someone who can be flexible. And if you can't be those types of things, then you're probably not cut out for a really high corporate job where things change all the time. And then finally, it really comes down to how you think about impact, which I think is the most important word of the entire corporate world. And of course, how you manage your manager, who is the most important person to you. And that tactically comes down to like, how do you interact with them in a one-on-one? How do you tell them about your work? How do you flag issues to them ahead of time so that you seem like a thought leader, not someone who's just reactive? All of these different types of tactics are things I started to pick up on, and when I started to execute them, I started to see my career change. And that's really, I would say, how I started off, Joe, just as someone who, thought I could go into the corporate world and have my work speak for itself, to where I've become where, it is a game. And you can play this game either on easy mode or hard mode. And hopefully what it is that I put out there, as well as what I have in my course, helps you at least play it on easy mode, because I think you're already impressive. But how do we make you even more impressive with as little effort as possible?
So speaking of important people, who's been that hero or inspiration for you in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Everyone talks about their mom. I think my mom has been someone who's gone through a lot, and I totally value her. And more importantly, someone who just rolls with the punches. She came to America not speaking English, and that's a huge hurdle to get through. She's growing up where she doesn't quite fit into American culture, but she is American, and so that's also a challenge. The other person who has been tactically really important for me is one of my previous managers. Her name is Mecca, and she is just phenomenal. And what I loved about her is that she made you feel important, because I think ultimately that's all what we want to be. We want to feel important. We want to feel like we're capable, and we want to feel like people are trusting us and that we play a value, that we're providing value and play a role in accomplishing a project or anything like that. And Mecca was all those things. She helped you feel important. She gave you the tough feedback, but she was also there to listen to you. And one thing that she said really well that I want everyone to sort of take on is she just said the words, "I hear you." And that has just been pivotal, right? People just want to be heard. And she can say, "I hear you, but this is my approach," or "I hear you and I can understand where you came from, but this is the gap in where you need to be." That's all okay, but feeling as if you were seen and that someone saw you and the work that you provided and the value that you created, that's really important. And the other component to that is how do they push you to be better? And I think feeling seen makes you feel like, you know what? There are areas where I can do better. She's seeing the work that I'm doing. She's not ignoring it, and she's acknowledging it. And there are areas and there are gaps that I need to close in order for me to be my best self. And so as we think about different types of people, especially for people who are early in their career, see the people who make you feel seen. See the people who can push you, who can give you the feedback, but also work with you. You don't want to work with people who are a-holes, right? Who are just people who give you the bad feedback, never talk well about you, never help you. And you want to really lean into the people who can help you, because those are the people who help you not just today, but will get you more opportunities down the line. And I think the phrase, "your network is your net worth," is really, honestly, it stands today too. What about you, Joe? Who really helped you in your career?
Oh, I would say probably one of the biggest, more foundational people. I'm a IT technician by day, and my first boss that I had was very fundamental. His quote was, "You attract more bees with honey," and he was just a really nice guy, really good with people, and just had a really good outlook. When I got hired, my initial interview, there was 12 or 13 people in the room, which was weird because I thought it was going to be one person. And I walk into this boardroom, and he was all the way across the room, and he had two criteria for hiring somebody. He said somebody with a good attitude and a willingness to learn, and that was it. That was his foundation. So his name was Randy. He was a wonderful person.
Oh, I love that. Good attitude and willingness to learn. That is just so applicable no matter, where you come from, how old you are, or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, of everybody that's out there, whether it's in business or otherwise, if you can meet one fascinating person on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
That's a great question. I'm going to sound a little bit like Gen Z, but I would love to chat with either Taylor Swift or Kim Kardashian. And here's why. I feel like they're marketing geniuses. They have figured out the way to hook people in, how to engage them, and how to keep them interested throughout. And the other component I'd say is they're sort of chameleons. They change. they adapt. And I feel like a lot of us, we're sort of scared of change. We're scared of adapting. And I feel like those are two people who do it really well, but also do it in the limelight where it is so scary, right? Because you're worried about getting canceled. You're worried about like making a mistake, and they just sort of own it. So I would say those two, just because I want to learn. I'd love to learn just how they handle their businesses, and they're both billionaires now. And like they started off as either people who are just a random singer on a street, or like someone who is just another girl growing up in LA. And I just feel like what they've done is really incredible.
So what is the motivation for you every day to wake up and to do the work that you do, to accomplish what you want to get done and evolve as a human?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. So I have to sort of what you do. By day, I am a tech worker, and at night, I am someone who I like to say is I'm like your early career expert, right? I'm really here to help those who are early in their career really navigate this workplace and learn how to play this game so that they can reach their career goals faster. I would say like the reason I show up, the reason that I'm here is because I want to constantly get better. I know that I am not always going to be the best, and I'm probably not even the best ever, but I have this like desire to always get better, and that's why it allows me to take feedback. That's why I show up and I want to like just learn from anyone, regardless if you're 22 or if you're 52. And that's the type of stuff that I want to also give back to others. I really believe in the phrase like pay it forward. A lot of people have helped me out in my career, and I want to make sure that I help others out in their career as well. What about you, Joe?
I think it's just having a passion, finding what you're made for, like what you're supposed to do. I think that right there is enough. And then obviously having good people and family and everyone around you that believes in you and cheers you on, it always makes everything a little bit easier. Yeah,
I hear you. Exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
So of everything that you've done and accomplished and evolved into at this point in your life, what are you the proudest of?
What am I the most proudest of?
Yeah.
I think that's easy. I think I got 2 kids. I'm really proud of them. They are brave. They are problem solvers, and there's people who I'm trying to teach to like roll with the punches. I did not learn how to roll with the punches when I was younger, and I feel like that was a huge detriment to me. Right? I hate change, and now I'm like trying to work through it as someone who's in their mid-30s, and I want to make sure that my kids understand change is just the constant. And I'm most proud of them. They make me smile the most. They're the ones who make me the most aggravated, and they make me want to pull my hair out, but I would say I'm most proud of them, and probably the most proud of the relationship that I have with my husband. It's hard being married. It's hard having 2 kids while being married and making time for the kids, but also making time for yourself and also a significant other. And I would say, like, even though I'm so corporate and I am that corporate girl, if you don't have those relationships in your life, whether that is a partner, whether that is kids, whether that's family, whether that's like friends or anything, it's sort of, it lacks the shine that you would want to have in your whole life. Your career will always be there, but your career is one-dimensional. I think everything else makes you who you are. But that's, I would say that at a high level would be who I'm most proud of. What about you, Joe? Who brings you the most, I would say, joy in your life?
Oh, my family for sure, friends. It's all of that combined, and I love doing this. This has been an unexpected passion that's really kind of blossomed. I think that in this increasingly divided world we live in, the fact that talking to so many people from around the world, there's so much more common ground than the media or anybody else would lead you to believe. I think we're all kind of shooting for the same kinds of things. And I think there's a lot of us in the world that are waking up and doing things for the right reasons. And it just reassures me in humanity, whether it's heading into an election or heading into some kind of collective endeavor. It just makes me feel a little better about what the fulcrum of what we're doing on this planet is all about. Yeah,
I totally agree with you, 100%.
So
I feel so seen and heard, Joe. Thank you for saying that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, of everything that you've learned and all the routes you've been down in life, if you were to have a dream tonight, you ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is to prioritize your mental health, right? Like, and then also the second thing I would say is really think about that this is constantly a journey, and you're never going to have all the answers, and you sometimes just have to move forward knowing 70% of the information and be okay with that. There's no joy in looking backwards and saying, I wish I did this, or I wish I didn't do that. Be okay with the decision that you make. Be okay with making a decision with not all the information out there. And then also be okay with just being wrong. Be okay with losing. Be okay with all of that stuff, because ultimately things will work out. And that's really what I mean by mental health. It all comes down to how can we, I call it gaslight, Joe, but it's how do we just change the way that we think to just know that, you know what, things are going to work out. And there might be times when it may not seem like they're working out in that very moment, but it will work out in the long term. And that's the confidence that I wish that I had when I was younger. Because I feel that when you're young, you can sometimes be so worried about what's most present in front of you. You're worried about that presentation that you need to give. You're worried about this date that you're going on. You're worried about all these things. But those little things, quite honestly, those are small. And if you look at it more at the 30,000-foot view, that's when you're able to see, hey, things are going to work out, things are going to be okay. And I just wish I had that confidence to see that 30,000 view when I was younger. What about you, Joe?
I would probably tell myself to not worry about what people think.
Yeah.
There's so much stock that we put into things based on what people think, and it just doesn't really mean that much. I mean, you got to live your narrative, and once you start worrying about what people think, because everybody has the reason why they think the way they do, and misery loves company, and half the people that dispense advice or whatever are doing it for selfish, nefarious reasons. So just stay in your lane and do your thing.
Yeah, totally. Totally,
so,
100%.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, ultimately, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm someone who is really empathetic. I think I'm someone who is action-oriented, probably a little too action-oriented. And I'm someone who is working on my rolling with the punches. You're not going to come to me if you're looking for the most creative idea out there in the whole wide world. But you're going to come to me when you're I got a problem. How do we solve it? And I could help you work through that problem, figure that stuff out. And quite honestly, I'm okay with that. I don't know how you feel, Joe, in terms of the reflections that you've had on your own career or anything, but I am now leaning into what my superpowers are, because I feel that is the special knowledge that I have. I am not going to be someone who you go to copyright the new Apple billboard or something, or whatever the campaign would be. But I am someone for how do I help you execute that plan? How do we think about it strategically? What are our goals? And that honestly took a lot of time for me to be okay with. But that's sort of where I am now. And who knows, maybe 5 years from now that will change, but I want to continue just honing in on what I can do and honestly be proud of it, right? Not be upset that I'm not the most creative person, but be proud that this is what I have as my superpower. What about you, Joe?
I think probably at the end of the day, I am what you see. What you get is pretty much what I try to do. I remember one of the reasons why I've asked this question is there was a musician one time, I was asking him about this kind of question in some derivative of a way, and he was talking about a professor that he had that was kind of the same way with everybody. And that's not really, it's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to do, because we all have different roles of nurturing and getting things done and all of that. But I think I try to be pretty true to life based on what you see here, you would get in other situations. So, yeah, that's just trying to strive to have some level of, a unilateral level of how I deal with life.
Yeah, totally. I totally hear you there, 100%. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. So if anyone wants to reach out, learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
they can reach out at Sally Ivester at sallyivester.com. So SALLYIVESTER.com, and they'll find me.
Excellent. Sally, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sending the questions back. This was a wonderful discourse. Thank you for the work you're putting out there, the good energy, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate the time, and thank you all so much, too. Have a great one.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.